Arizona Cardinals fans, to the Redbird Reboot. Arizona Cardinals have entered their offseason. We are here to talk about all of the new updates that we're seeing. My name is Blake Murphy. Of course, you can always follow our show at Redbird Reboots, as well as being able to follow me at Blake Murphy7, and of course, my co-host, the film guru himself, Marcos Labrada. Marcos, we're here today to talk about a couple of interesting Cardinal connections around the league. We also are talking about the final four teams in the NFL, which means that the Houston Texans pick finally has a landing spot for Arizona all the way down at 27. And we'll be able to take a look at some of the possible players the Cardinals could look at in positions if they do stay at that spot. But before we get going, how are you doing today? As football is wrapping up, we have 2 games left this next week, and then of course the Pro Bowl, and then the Super Bowl. So only 4, technically 3, if you want to look at the Pro Bowl that way, games left of the NFL season. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Of course, we're about to get to the end of the season. Football's like getting to this final stage. I think the entire country is actually backing up the Lions. I heard from I kind of tried to get a little bit of a feeling of who like the country wants to win. Usually there's that one team that's the underdog that like everybody wants to see at least make it to the Super Bowl and win. I think it's unanimously just the Lions because the 49ers have been there before. Of course, you had the Ravens who have been there before. They're kind of coming in a close second. And I believe what was the last final team? It's the Ravens, the 49ers, the Lions, and then there's one more team. No, the Chiefs. And the Chiefs are just the ones that are people just don't want. Like they're like, okay, we're done with the Chiefs. The Chiefs have been there consecutively for like three years, have won 2 Super Bowls. It's like, okay, we're done with the Chiefs. So we're not gonna root for them anymore. So I think the Lions are who everybody wants to get there. They want them to win. I love that team. Like I love the makeup of the team, and plus like the just the journey of like especially for Jared Goff. I mean, how could you not like the story? So yeah, I'll be rooting for the Lions coming going forth, and I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy, at least for Cardinals fans, because there's no denying at least that the Arizona Cardinals probably biggest rival right now is, outside of maybe little things like the Sean McVay or Cardinals kickers against the Seahawks, it's the 49ers. The Cardinals have done terrible against the Niners ever since what I believe it was the 2000 and I want to say 2017 season with Kyle Shanahan taking over. They've just been kind of the new giant in the division. It hasn't led to any Super Bowl wins, but it sure has led to a lot of NFC Championship game appearances. And that's a spot where I think if you're a Cardinals fan, you probably are rooting for the Lions to be able to send them home. I think that's an easy one. On the other side, I've seen a lot of like, we don't want to see Taylor Swift on the TV, just show football. The Chiefs have already won a couple Super Bowls. They're back here. Patrick Mahomes has never missed a AFC Championship game since he started playing quarterback back in 2018, which is a momentous feat. He's kind of the new Tom Brady and the Patriots with Andy Reid over there. I do think that there's a lot of people who are looking at the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson and hoping that this could be maybe a Harbaugh-centric type of football season with the Michigan Wolverines winning a national title. Seeing John Harbaugh go to a Super Bowl would be pretty spectacular. And we even do have Jim Harbaugh in the news as he officially finds a team. He ends up signing with the Los Angeles Chargers, who have, of course, Justin Herbert, have quite a bit of talent, but not a lot of depth, and are going to be over the salary cap, needing to make some moves. They also have a top 5 pick this year, probably to use somewhere on the offensive side of the ball or perhaps in a trade back. But Marcos, these head coaching spots are filling up. The Harbaugh mania, I think, would reach another level if you do end up seeing John Harbaugh go to that Super Bowl. I have it as a prediction for Fran and Ravens in the Super Bowl, but the Lions are able to shock the world and get there. It would feel very similar to a certain 2008 Cardinals Super Bowl run. Wouldn't you agree? Where the Cardinals were overcoming this negativity, first time getting playoff wins in a huge amount of time, first time getting to an NFC Championship game for Super Bowl. There would be quite a bit of Lions fever, I think, in a way that would be similar to that 2008 team where Arizona shocked the world getting to have that chance to play the Steelers for that ring.
Yeah, I think I see some parallels there, especially with the notion that the Lions shouldn't even somewhat belong there. Like some people would say, like that's not a team that should be there, or especially for this year, they're not part of the elite. And of course, they were able to get to this point, and they might as well just finish it off, especially since I mean, we're gonna see another Baltimore Ravens like 49ers like, Super Bowl. And that's our rival that they're playing against. So of course we want the Lions to beat our rival. So I do believe that like if they did get there, that would be the ultimate like underdog story. But obviously, hopefully, with a better ending for them than what happened to us, because we were in the point of being a Super Bowl like champion for like what 2 minutes and 35 seconds left on the clock, and then we lost that opportunity to a last drive and a catch that was like right on the right on the boundary and stuff like that really pisses me off that that's what happened to us and that's what took our Super Bowl away. But I mean, I'm not gonna wish anything like that to the Lions and be like, hey, you guys made it, but I really hope you guys don't win because then you guys could be in the same boat as us now. I'm full forward rooting for them and whoever they have to face off against in the AFC, just take them down. Go get your guys Super Bowl. Jared Goff can go ahead and get his redemption story going, and then you can kind of get a sense of like, hey, we have somebody in our front office that was part of their scouting team that literally helped build that team. So that could give us that confidence and saying, hey, Dave Sears really does know how to draft. Hey, Dave Sears is the one who was in charge of scouting in that department, and oh boy, have they been hitting on like picks, even on their first round picks that they're not supposed to be drafting. They've even hit on those.
It feels very much like we don't know exactly what Adrian Wilson may have done with this Cardinals team if he'd gotten the full time opportunity. We don't know how much say he had against the Steve Keim, but we can at least say that, at least for now, the fit of Dave Sears with this team seems to be hitting at the right time, which is honestly very impressive. I think, at least, to be able to have a general manager brings in a guy outside of someone who he knows and is able to essentially hit on a scalp similar to hitting on a draft pick. One of the other things I think that we can talk about, at least that came up in the news here, is talking about the aggressiveness of Jonathan Gannon. One of the interesting places, at least that you can find, at least we have used sometimes for stats, is going to be with DVOA, which is defensive value against. Essentially, it's the how does your defense, with the variable of it, is adjusted for your opponent, is how it works. So what that means is if you're the Cardinals and you're playing the Panthers, hey, you didn't play that big of a team. You're the Cardinals and you're playing a team like the Ravens, you're going to be a lot more impressive in DVOA. So one of the measures that happened here, at least, talked about the most aggressive coaches of the 2023 season. And what's an interesting stat in here is if you look at this chart that came up with DVOA here, you've got at the number one top, you've got Jonathan Gannon of the Arizona Cardinals. He had essentially on fourth down conversions when the team is most likely to go for it and to be rewarded with going for it. So you're not talking about going from 4th and 1 from your own 35. You're talking about going on it on 4th and goal, going for it on like 4th and 1 instead of just kicking a field goal, going for it instead of punting around midfield. Jonathan Gannon, at least, had the expected amount of attempts that they thought he would go for it was about 11 or so this year. Now, Cardinals didn't get into a ton of fourth down situations where they went for it on 4th and 1 because their offense wasn't quite as functional as others were. But he actually went for it 18 times on only about 10.6 opportunities. That ranks overall higher than one of the most aggressive head coaches in football, Dan Campbell, who always seems to go for it on 4th and short. He had about 17 times they expected he'd go for it. He went for 29. But Jonathan Gannon actually had a higher percentage overall. He may have only gone for it 18% of the time, but his aggressiveness in going for it ranked ahead of Dan Campbell. Sirianni with Philly has a very analytics-friendly team. Kevin Stefanski, similar with how he would go for it a lot with his rushing team in Cleveland. And then, of course, Mike Vrabel, everyone knows that he is one of those guys who will be aggressive. They have Derrick Henry in that backfield. A lot of these guys who are these type of go for it coaches in the top 14, like Sean Payton's up there, even Frank Reich, who's an offensive guy. You've got obviously Brandon Staley would go for it quite a bit. You got guys like Mike Daniel and Mike LaFleur who also were up there. I think what we're seeing, at least overall, is that when you're looking at the coaches who don't go for it as much, look at the bottom list. Obviously, you're going to talk about Bill Belichick. You can see some other great coaches there, like Shane Steichen this past season, John Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin. Some of these guys who are more defensive first coaches, even with the Sean McVay, there's kind of an interesting mix for the most part where a lot of the coaches who seem to have had some failure either are going for it maybe too much and too aggressive, or some of them maybe you could argue with like a Doug Peterson, Ron Rivera. Even I think that there's some complaints you can have at least about with Robert Saleh and the Jets. They didn't have a lot of offense that year, but they just didn't seem to go for it despite having, Brees Hall and a top running game in the backfield. Being able to have a super aggressive coach is interesting to see because I think it backs up this thought of Jonathan Gannon talking about how he wanted to be an attacking team, kind of having their guys go for it, having them be coach hard and being able to play hard. What are your thoughts, Marcos, about this sort of aggressiveness that's kind of similar almost to how Cliff Kingsbury would go for it all the time with Arizona? What do you think this tells us about the Cardinals this year and maybe moving forward?
It's interesting looking at like how he's ahead of like Dan Campbell and Sirianni, who I mean we all know they use the tush push on third and fourth down if they need to, and Jesus Christ, he's like ahead of like Staley as well. And I always thought Staley was the most aggressive like coach when it came to going fourth down because he's sold out to like analytics. So I it it's a situation where like if you know you have a high chance of being able to get a fourth down, you obviously do it because the analytics does back up that if you do go for it on fourth down and you do convert in certain situations, if you don't convert, it doesn't really hurt you as much. Or like if you do convert, obviously that's a big reward when it comes to you keeping a drive alive that could lead to some expected points, whether it's a field goal or a touchdown. So with him doing that often. He didn't do it like the number of times that he did it wasn't the highest. It was the percentage that was the highest, meaning that he, I guess you can say he kind of understood the circumstances that they had the advantage in being able to being able to go for it, and they knew that they could draw up a play or have a situation scenario where they would get the fourth down conversion, and so he is possibly just leaning on the analytics part of it and also leaning and diverting to probably possibly his offensive coordinator who is able to tell him like, hey, like I got something drawn up in this certain situation, let's go for it. Or hey, like I can guarantee you we're gonna get this with this play that I drew up or this play that I have called and whatnot. We practiced this before and this is the scenario. We're looking at this type of a defense. Let's just do it, and then they convert on it, and obviously we get rewarded from it. If he's leaning on to that where he's not attempting it like the highest amount, but his percentage is attempting higher than anybody else, and possibly those conversions are working out in the long run, then I think that's a good place to go forth when it comes to like, hey, that's a good attribute to have, and possibly something is deferring to his offensive staff.
Yeah, one thing I can think of a lot of times too was how there would be times where it would feel like in the game the Cardinals, in order to keep it close, had a got to get it type of play. As far as their fourth down, we saw them be able to run some of those with Josh Dobbs, even seeing them convert some of those, even on fourth down, one on fourth and goal, where they took Kyler Murray off the field, brought on the big body and his backup. They were able to take out of the, I think it was fifth round this year, Clayton Tune.
Yeah, Clayton Tune.
And they were able to pick some of those up. It's something that we saw with Cliff, that when they had an athletic quarterback in Kyler Murray, they were also able to pick up a lot of plays on fourth down. The interesting case, of course, is there a chance of being over aggressive where you go for it on fourth down when you should just take the points? I think it's going to be interesting to follow this in 2024 because if the Cardinals are improved on defense, if that offense gets a weapon in the passing game, whether that's receiver are on the line, then you're probably going to be looking at when they go for it and have that aggressiveness. Do they go for it when they should go? Because the way that this chart works, so you can see Sean Payton here for the most part, they're having, I think they call the aggressive index. They expected him to go for it about 11 times based on how the situation was, how close the line was, and he went for it 11 times. Like, that's more of the, hey, like, we know we can pick up this down. Whereas you talk about Gannon and Dan Campbell kind of rolling the dice a little bit. It's one of those cases, I think, too, where you think about I think of that fourth down, I think it was fourth down play with the Lions where they end up with that penalty, unless I'm mistaken, because of that weird substitution change. We're also seeing other coaches go for two a lot more at much higher rate when they're down by 8 points, which makes a lot of sense. That's something that actually did happen in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game against Dan Campbell. The Buccaneers are down by 8. They end up getting, I believe, or maybe it was 14, I remember. They scored a touchdown, and then they go for 2 immediately, because if you score 6 points, it doesn't hurt you. Then you can get a 2-point conversion on the next try if you don't get it. What's interesting was that the play call that they chose, which is a long fade route, was one that took a little long to get there. Play got broken up, at least, by one of the, not Ifeamu, at least, if it's the Obi Ifeamu, I think it is. I'll have to remember. Anyway, I'll probably get that at least right with the Lions player, at least for the most part. So, anyway, the interesting case is it's not just about being aggressive on fourth down, Marcos. It's about being aggressive, having a high percentage play that you're able to get, like, of course, the tush push, and being able to actually pick up that fourth down. Because there's times, I think, where we can all agree, no one wants to see your team be just barely out of field goal range, have it 1 yard away. You punt it back to the other team, and the ball bounces into the end zone for a touchback. You only get about, 25 yards. It's almost like, hey, like, if you're going to take a shot, even if you take a Hail Mary to the end zone and it gets picked off, you're going to be in the same place as you were. You're punting it, and you even had a shot to go for it on a touchdown there. There's, I think, ways of managing the game for different players and different coaches, and it's Melifanu, Ifeaudi. Yeah, I'll have to remember this.
Fanu?
Yeah. Ifanu Melifanu. There. Oof,
okay, there you go.
It is a mouthful to say, at least. But anyway, he was nice and tall back there in coverage, and Mike Evans gets in front of him with that big body. Ball gets broken up. That means that in order to win the game, you're going to have to go for 2 for sure, but you're not going to be able to tie it. Even more so, you get a chance to win the game, potentially, in regulation. The best example I can think of this here is, you look at Pete Carroll and the Seahawks in the last game of the season, they are essentially down by 7 points. They get the ball back after the missed field goal by Prater, drive down the field, they get the touchdown, and then instead of going for the tie, they go for the 2. What do? They run a play, guy gets wide open. Cardinals all of a sudden are down by 1 point with just under about 2 minutes left to go in the game. These are the game management decisions that I think this first year we're all saying, hey, Jonathan Gannon, be aggressive, see what happens. We're not really caring about the record anyway. Like, go out there as best as you can to see if you can go out and try to win games this next year. I think, Marcos, these decisions in close games are going to be important. It's going to be very interesting to see how Jonathan Gannon's aggressiveness either helps, or if it's in a place where he's being over aggressive and gives other teams too much of a shot if the down isn't picked up. Could that end up hurting the Cards? I think it's going to be very interesting to watch this aggressive type of style play out over the next few years.
Yeah, he definitely has his 1 year, like his 1 year buffer, because like the expectations weren't like super high for this team. Like, I know a lot of it can go to pride when it comes to like, hey, we should be trying to win as many games as we possibly can for our fan base and for everything, but we also gotta acknowledge that we have to, like, also give him a 1 year buffer to be able to try out these things that he wanted to try out. But that went towards other situations and circumstances as well. But either way, he got his 1 year buffer where he is aggressive next year. If these decisions don't lead to good results, then that's when everything comes into question. Like, hey, Jonathan, are you holding back the team by your decision making? Are you actually helping out the team by being this aggressive? And did you just cost the team a game in a situation where next year we're not gonna be looking to try to get another top 5 pick? We're trying to actually try to either get a winning record and get into the playoffs, because we would imagine that with one more off season, we would build our team good enough to be able to get ourselves in a position where we're either building towards a playoff seed, or we're getting to the playoffs and then possibly being like a, either wild card or even maybe a shock expectations and then win the division. So those are our goals going into next year. So these decisions are going to be crucial, especially if he's costing us games because of it.
And one of the best examples, of course, with that is one of Jonathan Gannon's better friends, and Brandon Staley, who would go for it and be aggressive on fourth down, but it would be a strange way in which he did it, because you would say, hey, you need to go for it on fourth down, and suddenly you see him punting or kicking the field goal. And then other times you'd go, hey, look, this is like a perfect time at least. Wait, why are you going for this? Like, you could put the game away, but this is like a 4th and 2. You're just lining up like you're going to run the ball in the backfield. They've got 8 guys in the box. We'll call a timeout and see if you can get a better play. And then they run it up the middle, get stuffed. The other team takes over. There were times it felt like that the aggressiveness needs to be tied to a process, something that Jonathan Gannon has talked about, being very process oriented, recognizing that your results may vary, but if the process is right, then you're going to be able to be moving forward. There's an old statement that says, hey, like, even if you are going to miss the moon, if you shoot for it in the first place, you can land somewhere amongst the stars. Obviously, there's points where that breaks down, but you can at least understand the idea of when you are at least saying, hey, like, we're going to be able to shoot for the best process possible. And if we don't get there, then we at least know for sure that we're on the right direction, rather than just simply saying, like how we'd see it too often with Steve Keim, hey, we finished and made a playoff team at the end of it. We're going to extend Zach Ertz, extend James Conner, be able to extend Cliff Keim and everyone, extend Kyler Murray. When really we saw that at the end of that season, the Cardinals really needed a much stronger identity and even a future beyond Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins, and a decent run game with some veteran offensive linemen being just kind of what petered out a little bit in the end. Speaking of former Arizona Cardinals, we do have a update, at least for some of that. It's talking about Cliff Kingsbury. That's right, the Cliff Kingsbury. He has a shot to be back in the National Football League. He's already interviewed for multiple teams, including the Chicago Bears job, which was not something that I believe he was going to be offered. The Bears pick at number 1. He was Caleb Williams' coordinator this past year, but a lot of people, including myself, when we watched that USC offense this year, there was a lot of issues similar to that 2022 Cardinals offense, where you'd see a lot of go routes. Would be 3rd and 1, immediate checkup to be able to toss the ball deep. There would be a lack of being able to see protections get picked up. There even would be a lot of times just simply faking an RPO just for the point of faking it, rather than just dropping back and throwing it. A lot of putting Caleb into a spot where the receivers would sometimes run straight routes to the sticks and then stop and wait for the ball. And he still put up numbers. But when you're looking at Caleb Williams in 2018, I don't have as much of film for this, but I can find some of this at least over here in a second, Marcos. You look at Caleb being a guy who had a under center play action game, or at least a play action game that had a strong rushing attack, that was able to get him to step up in the pocket, being able to go through his reads, throw the ball deep. That didn't seem to be at all there with what we saw from Cliff Kingsbury this past year. And I think the question, at least overall, Marcos, is this where we see that Keim and Bidwell and some of just the limitations that they had held Cliff Kingsbury back at least? Or are we talking about maybe a guy who a lot of teams are kind of going after each other for, to try to get to be an OC, and maybe he's just not a great offensive coordinator and not a great head coach on the Cardinals side? But it seems like for one way or another, Marcos, they want to bring him in as an OC, where some people think that's his best fit. Do you think that's a good idea, pursuing Cliff, as the Raiders, I believe, not just the Bears, but the Pittsburgh Steelers also have, in trying to bring him in?
So Cliff was actually he was the quarterbacks coach for Caleb, so he wasn't really in charge of like play design or anything like that. And Lincoln Riley
Well, yes, he was.
is a carbon.
A little bit. There was plays that Caleb talked about where Cliff design the play, and Cliff would work with him to design a play like that he liked or was comfortable with. And there was some influence, at least, that we were able to see when it came to it from. So I agree with you that it still falls on to Lincoln Riley, but with
But
what we
Lincoln
have
Riley's
now,
an like he's like so Lincoln Riley and Cliff as far as like play design is concerned because they both come from the air raid tree. They're both sprung from under I believe it's either Hal Mummy or
yep, and Mike Leach.
no
Hmm?
it's
Both
the
under the Mike Leach
deceased
tree, I think.
yeah Mike Leach, there you go. So Mike Leach, the great, the Mike Leach, who like, oh my god, talk about like a personality right there. And so they were just like on the same base, and then Mike Leach would be above, and it'd be like, you know, the founders of it or anything like that. So with that, like what I got from why the Bears wanted to hire him as the offensive coordinator was because they wanted to pluck him to obviously have the connection of saying to their fan base, like, look, man, we're getting Caleb Williams as quarterback coach to just basically bring him into the system and then have a spread type offense. So like this is what I found very interesting. So we think about like the Baltimore Ravens, you know, the Baltimore Ravens just moved off from their, you know, offensive coordinator. I keep forgetting what his name is. We all know who he is.
Greg Roman. Greg Roman.
Yeah, Greg Roman, exactly. So I think about that as in like, hey, this guy was holding back. Uh, he was holding back Jackson, holding back. I say because I think he was actually helping him develop to the game that he is right now, but he just wasn't ready. So then they went ahead and moved off of that, and then got an offensive coordinator from college, the Georgia offensive coordinator, who now is spreading everything out to him and making it so he's like, hey, I'm gonna make you like throw the ball more because we're gonna run more of a spread offense. And then now he's becoming an MVP candidate. So I looked at that and I was like, that's a role reversal that's happening right there. So there are instances, of course, in little bits and pieces of like air raid type of offenses in the NFL. It's not full air raid, but there's the idea and the concepts. So with him getting these calls from all these places, and I'm not 100% sure what other places are trying to hire him because I have my eye on that Chicago Bears one because of the fact that we do know that if they do hire him, that's pretty much signaling to everybody that, hey, we are going to move forward with Caleb Williams. We're not going to stick with Justin Fields
Which
because
is
Justin
why
Fields
it's
wouldn't even
yeah, very
be. I don't.
interesting then because they've
Yeah.
already made their hire. They've hired Shane Waldron, who was the Seahawks offensive coordinator, actually
Oh,
before he
okay.
was the final pick. So I've seen fans taken on both sides. Some fans say, hey, they didn't hire Cliff. They're not taking Caleb. They may stick with Justin. Others are saying, well, if you look at what Shane Waldron has kind of done, he's not really run that like Cliff Kingsbury air raid type of offense. You'd probably have some adjustments that you'd be needing to make. It's kind of the same tree that Bears coordinator Luke Getsy comes from. I think the biggest difference, of course, is you look at Waldron's work with the Houston Texans and with Geno. He's a guy that's come up in some head coaching searches as well. I
Oh yeah.
think that that's one of the players who he may be a 1 year rental, but that's a guy I think at least that, like you said, the one that's most intriguing to me, Marcos. Cliff's interviewing with the Eagles. What do you think about that?
I Okay, so that one you're gonna have to let me know what other jobs because I didn't even know that like the Bears. I thought the Bears were still interviewing him, so that one's off the table. Obviously, we're not talking about that anymore. So the Eagles because they're moving off of. So they had Desai as a DC, and of course, you know the much maligned on offense. I'm not sure who they had as the offensive coordinator, but Jesus, am I gonna say that like those Eagles gave me 2021 Cardinals vibes, and it's not just me saying it. There was a few other people that were paying attention to like the trajectory of what the Eagles accomplished this year and how they fell apart at the end of that year. And in 2021, the same thing happened. And remember, I mentioned to you they were stuck on shotgun. So the shotgun offense, where they were just exclusively running everything from shotgun and not getting very like, you know, not using too much motion, being too static and running any type, like pretty much all they could do is run inside zone and duo from the shotgun effectively. You can't run outside zone effectively because it throws your, it gives you weird angles when you try to hit the edge.
You have
So
to run the
they were,
quarterback keeper where the quarterback's running the zone read himself, and that's basically what we saw was after a while, there wasn't as many other areas you could do rushing attacks or play action fakes under center. A lot of times would just keep the quarterback in the pocket, and you wouldn't see pass rushers have to respect the run that much at all. I think you're totally right there.
Yeah, and that's what the problems we had when we had Cliff Kingsbury as our head coach. But I obviously I'm not gonna sit here and say, well, like Cliff Kingsbury doesn't have play like a part of his playbook that has like under center action because I did see a lot of runs from under center at the end of the season, and I didn't understand why they just couldn't implement that more towards the beginning of the season. Then once again, that's something that I've heard from quarterbacks, coaches, and offensive coordinators when it comes to like comfort and whatnot. But
Mhm.
we got Kyler Murray under center now, and now it's looking like he's getting comfortable under center. So it should have been a situation where he should have been put under center. And if there was a conflict between that, then that should have been a situation where it's like Cliff, your job is on the line here. If you don't change the offense, it's gonna fall on you. And it fell on him. He fell on the sword, and he got fired for it. So now going with the Eagles, they have the same issue and they had the same problem. You know you have plays from under center. You know you can institute that. Don't go in there and if he interviews and he gets a job, let's say that's the situation. He needs to learn that like they just got out of that situation with Jalen Hurts where they were trying to do the whole like you went on the outside with your talent. That's it. Jalen Hurts, he attacks the B gaps. Now they're starting to clog those up like they did. San Francisco put the blueprint out there, and you can't stay in the shotgun and be the most static team. I mean, like the Cardinals ran more plays, more pass plays from under center this past year, and it wasn't even close the difference between them and the Eagles. And that's a big that's something that's big because of the fact that we had a quarterback that exclusively was in the shotgun for many years and either was comfortable in the shotgun or just wanted to run the system in the shotgun. But now he's under center and now he's running bootlegs, he's running waggles, he's doing hard play actions like, to sink in the linebackers, and it's helping him out. So he has to go in with that same mindset going in there. If that's not the case, then what's the reason for even hiring him as an offensive coordinator to begin with?
Yeah. And I agree with you. The best way I can say it is I had to predict a place for him to end up. I'd predict the Eagles, and you would say that it would be on one hand, you could say he already fits a lot of what they're doing, which then you could question is Jalen Hurts going to be able to develop similar to how we saw Kyler Murray develop? At least he's about 6 foot, shorter quarterback, at least there. I agree with you in that what we see from Cliff is something that we need to see some more adjustments. He has a lot of good qualities. Like if you go to a bad offense, Cliff will be able to actually boost your productivity because there's a lot of things that he does, whether it's being able to draw through matchups with some of the play design and the fact that he's not an air raid guy who completely avoids running the ball. It'll improve. But as we also seen with the Arizona Cardinals and now in this second year with instead of Shane Steichen, who is able to be brilliantly able to kind of keep that college offense feel, but would use different formations, variations to kind of create a much stronger play action game to the point where you're watching on replay, you're seeing some of those personnel choices and the play action guys are just biting on it. And you see either one-on-one coverage or guys who are able to run a route wide open. That just disappeared in this 2023 Eagles season. I agree with you that I don't think that Cliff would be as much of an improvement versus a lateral type of move. And that's something that will be interesting to see because I do think that he's going to have one of these jobs in part because he's gotten so many interviews. He's interviewed with the Eagles. He's interviewed with the Raiders, who have hired their former general manager, Tom Telesco, which we can talk about a little bit of what that would look like. We've seen the Steelers also reportedly from Peter King said he's going to interview with them. And we've not even gotten head coaches, at least determined yet, for the Falcons. Haven't had them yet determined for, I believe there's another team still out there, at least after Jim Harbaugh has signed with the Chargers, that still has a head coach opening in the NFL. But this is a place where I think the easiest way I can also look at this too is when we were watching the Bengals struggles earlier this season. Joe Burrow had hurt his ankle, of course, in the preseason, was playing through it. One thing that I think that was Deontay Lee, I think, who I know at one point worked for Pro Football Focus, talked, and it made a lot of sense, is teams are now basing their personnel in these two high safety looks. So when you got those two high safety looks, you can't just simply throw a goal ball if you're going to get one-on-one coverage. You're not even going to be able to hit the intermediate routes as much because if your pass protection game isn't top notch. Like you think of the teams like the Niners, you think of a team obviously like the Chiefs for the most part seem to fit this very well too. You're not going to have as much time in the pocket to be able to throw the ball. The way that you counter too high is recognize that, hey, you don't have a safety in the box. We're going to now put together a couple of tight ends on the ground and we're going to run that football because you're keeping those safeties back deep. Then what that leads to is you have a bootleg or you can do a deep play action fake. The safety gets sucked up having to stop the run and you're able to get guys behind them on some of these deeper plays that then will stress defenses at all three levels. One of the complaints about the Bengals offense this year is Joe Burrow is a very strong put me in shotgun type of guy. Like he'll be one to put in shotgun. If they blitz him, he'll like take the hit or get away. But part of the passing game for the Bengals we saw somewhat struggled this year because he wasn't able to get under center and run a bootleg like how you normally would because of that ankle injury and because of his own comfort level. He would just say, hey, I'd rather have the defense in front of me. I can make the reads. I'll take the hit. And we saw what happened this year with Joe Burrow was it wasn't just that ankle injury. He gets hurt later and is out for the rest of the season. The Bengals on offense actually improved in some areas, especially the run game, because Jake Browning came in. He's fully healthy and he was able to execute those boot and play action concepts from under center. And I think, Marcos, that goes back to a space of saying, I don't think it's necessarily saying that you have to be under play center and running the bootleg all the time because, as we've seen, there's some teams like the 2018 Cardinals who are under center all the time that would run run on first down, run on second down, try to run a play action fake on third down. You see Josh Rosen get blown up. It's not necessarily saying you have to be married to this one style, but it's more you have to have diversity in your approach to have as many possible ways to attack a defense and force them to account for as possible. And the fact that Cliff Kingsbury was not able to kind of get to that stage makes a lot of Cardinals fans wonder, maybe that Kyler's here now. Could we really see this franchise quarterback become that franchise quarterback we envisioned that he could always be? Because for one thing's for sure, it wasn't going to probably happen with Cliff Kingsbury at the team's head coaching spot or maybe even at the offensive coordinator place.
I think it's going to be really telling if he does take a job and what those numbers are going to look like. Because when I was looking at to see how many times he ran like plays from under center, when Kyler Murray was in, they were barely even going under center if any time. And then when Kyler Murray wasn't in, like let's just say a backup quarterback came in, like Colt or Trace McSorley or with the other person we had, Jake Driscoll, no, not Driscoll. It was somebody else. So, anyways, they put him more under.
Jeff Driscoll was one, but that was last year. I think we had a.
It was someone else.
They had a rough finish with David Blau, I believe, is the one who.
David Blau. There we go. Yeah, they put him under center more often and stuff.
It worked.
Because I saw. Yeah, because I saw that's where I started seeing a hint of like what Trey McBride could do. Because I knew when like this system was going to be implemented, I was like, Trey McBride is going to be able to be one of those leaking tight ends that's going to run like shallows or digs over the middle and get wide open. And that's what happened on a certain amount of plays, especially against the Atlanta Falcons team. He had some pretty impressive catches. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I can't wait to see if Trey McBride, when he gets more snaps and he starts out snapping Ertz, but now that he's in a system where, they're more playing under center and whatnot, like he's able to pull off that like that leak where he's either going to down block and then take off and then be wide open and whatnot. So that's what I saw. So is this Cliff Kingsbury learning? And to go with your point about Joe Burrow, there is a circumstance where I think they tried putting him under center more often. I think it was at the beginning of the 2022 season, and they were not off to a good start. And I think I keep forgetting the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. But
he's a funny guy at least for that.
Yeah.
So Zach Taylor.
Yeah, Zach Taylor was trying to implement more of a under center type of action, like a Shanahan type of system for Joe Burrow, and it just wasn't working out. And then they started going away from that, and then just kept him in shotgun. And the reason why that worked at that time was because, well, obviously from having the wide receiver talent there, that he was just able to just like survey the field and then be able to figure out where he's going to throw the ball, what the defense is giving him and stuff. Snap the ball, of course, takes us 2 or 3 steps back, and then he is able to get rid of it and whatnot. So that's what was going on in that circumstance, and I think it's very confusing what you do with Joe Burrow over there because Joe Burrow is a quarterback that holds on to the ball to the point where he gets sacked, but he himself will admit that sometimes the sacks don't affect the game as much as you think they would. I mean, there's a video about that, and I'm like, are you a masochist or something? Because I don't think any quarterback wants to get sacked as much as like he just basically said it's not that big of a deal in certain circumstances. I mean, we were just not gonna be able to kick a field goal anyway, so might as well just go for the first down. It's like that's true, but I still don't think you want to get sacked. I mean, that's not a good thing to go for, and that's not a record you want to break.
Yeah, there's areas at least where sacks are situational. And again, Brian Callahan, who was previously the offensive coordinator of the Bengals, is now the Titans head coach, and they're going to be undergoing a complete transformation. I'll be very curious to see what happens as far as who really takes that Bengals job. Do they have someone internal who runs the same area? Do they bring someone like Joe Brady over, who was his college coordinator, over who's now with the Bills? There's all sorts of interesting angles that you could look at, but at the crux of it ultimately is you sometimes have to be able to do a balance of where your quarterback is strong and what you can actually see. And Aaron Rodgers, I think, under the Shanahan style system of Matt LaFleur, was able to win a couple of MVP candidates there. But let's wrap up our Cliff discussion looking at just a little bit of the film. So this is from Caleb Williams' Heisman winning season. You can at least look at some of the area here. Steps up in the pocket, has to look to try to get out, makes one of those crazy Mahomesy-like throws because that's part of what Caleb Williams is. Looking here, at least,
I'm telling.
just some of the, it's also just the awareness. Looking at some of the pocket presence and stuff here, he doesn't really try to scramble, kind of at least hangs in the pocket.
Jesus.
Has enough confidence and just throws it right over the defensive back's head. You now can see also just some of the plays that he is able to make throwing the ball over, just beautiful placement. These are all types of plays we saw. Now, this is a great one, at least just out of the shotgun, drops back, is able to make his way, step up in the center, just throw a bullet right to the outside shoulder. This is why I think that he's probably going to be going number one overall. A play like this, you can see I absolutely love because this is one of those areas that you talk about being something that translates into the NFL. This is one of those shotgun pass plays. You've got essentially a four verts type of concept with the running back out of the backfield. You can see at least here someone jumped offside, so you know it's a free play. You've got the opportunity to be aggressive. We've even got a guy dropping back into coverage because they've recognized, hey, we've got two guys that are back here needing to spy on him. We've got receivers down the field. This is a good way to look for a one-on-one matchup. Your chip helps nothing. The guy's just bearing down on you. What does he do? Steps up further into the pocket, gets a little bit of room, and throws a dime right over the middle, at least to make sure. There's a lot of confidence here that we're able to see where Caleb was throwing the ball a lot from the pocket. Now, let's go ahead and we can contrast that with just some of the stuff that I got to see in person with the Arizona State football game this year, where you can see a lot of the, of course, this is going to be a lot of the throws versus just the highlight throws. But you can already see from here, there's certainly an interesting difference in between, especially for how some of the plays, especially in these type of shotgun plays that you can see. He does a good job of being able to kind of move slightly, get out to the side there. But when it comes to some of these different concepts that are involving Caleb, not where he's just having to be an athlete and make a play, we really get to see something kind of interesting, at least overall, where a lot of these designs are very Cliff Kingsbury-like, at least. So here he clearly is getting at least enough time for the most part to make some of those plays. But ones like that one's one of those beautiful ones where like you can still see how things are translating. This, I believe, is that crazy touchdown throw where he's backpedaling off that gets knocked down. One of these right here looks very, very familiar. Clearly, he's able to make it to that corner just because of the athlete he is, but it's very Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray heavy, right?
Like I said, I'm going to maintain with the whole, like, because they both operate like the same air raid type of system. So I'm not sure, like, the one thing that did separate Caleb, or what was supposed to separate Caleb, is he wins from the pocket and he tries to win by it with his arm. So if there's like any film study on like 2020, I think 2022 Caleb Williams, it's him mostly throwing darts like down the field and then just keeping his composure and then having his like pocket awareness and whatnot. Where in instances right here, he's like running for some
Yeah.
first downs and whatnot. So maybe he's just like looking probably for like a 1 or 2 second window and then taking off to see how much yardage he's getting.
Yeah, and it looks
I
like
don't know.
one of these plays here is interesting. Like this is just very clearly a bubble screen. You can see how the college football part of the reason why you can make a living off of little plays like that there, and then here you can at least see that there's times he hangs in the pocket, has done super well. It's ultimately
Big route.
not to say that he just went from being bad, but like even with different places, at least there's part of what makes Caleb that still bleeds through. But it was really interesting in seeing how there was kind of a blending of some of those air raid concepts. And like again, we're talking a lot from
He's trying to be a
shotgun
lead
to
blocker. Look at
yeah,
that.
no,
Oh my god.
no, he's gonna go number one very clearly at least for some of that. No, like there's a lot of stuff that's really fun. What's interesting was this was a 7-7 game, I think, going through the first, and there were some great plays that he I know had in some of the game, like right here, drops the ball, goes under pressure. He had a lot more fumbles this past year. Some of the areas, at least, hanging in the pocket for too long, which was one of the complaints I know that people had about with how Kyler had to get the ball out super, super quick. There's a lot of things that I think ultimately there was a step back, but it wasn't like it was a huge step back in the end. Like you're still seeing some special plays, at least he's able to make throwing off the back foot like that. This is just was interesting, I think, to be able to see in terms of how the run game was affected and how it wasn't effective. And part of what I think that the NFL could even learn from some of these places is the college game and the pro game are a bit different. There's a little bit more space over the middle to work with, but there's not going to be necessarily the same for like bubble screens. This is just an interesting way, and we'll probably go through and review some of the other quarterbacks there to see at least if the likes of a Jaden Daniels actually would be able to go ahead of where the Cardinals are picking. Play like this, at least here, I think is a really
Let's
good
hope.
example of Caleb being able to kind of make something out of nothing. Yeah, there's a lot of really kind of interesting. There you go. You can see that step
See
back
that
into the pocket. Yep. That
that's
was
that
one of the things I think that was interesting because, like you and I said, the first thing that we saw in Kyler would be a lot of plays like this. He would kind of get out of the pocket, run in a weird way, and kind of make one of those crazy throws, or just try to run for the first down. That's something that needed to develop in Kyler's game because this was kind of the limitation where if you've got all look at all those bodies down here, you've got about five guys running routes downfield, you just got a five-man protection. You've got a guy who's spying you, so you can't run forward. They're at least bringing at least an extra man coming through there. You've got at least them rushing for a spy, and they've dropped back, but the coverage is solid downfield. Now, this is one of those issues with getting into shotgun. You're in 3rd and 5. You're not in the 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3 type of situation where the coverage is good. A lot of times, what you want to be able to make sure that you can do is you step up in the pocket, get at least enough there. And Caleb, at least, he's kind of running over there. And you see they already have the spy chasing after him for the most part. Here's kind of where we've seen normally Caleb would in 2022, like do some awesome play. You can see number 9 is about to split out for the most part. He'd make some crazy backwards off his body throw. He attempts one of those. Is just not quite the same vision as it was before. I think that interesting. I'll be interesting to see what happens at least with. There's one of those plays I was thinking of at least on 1st and 10. We talked about he's reading immediate as far as one-on-one press coverage on the outside. You got two safeties over the middle of the field. This guy is definitely shading a little bit too far inside. You can tell that it's man-to-man coverage. He's probably lined up over where the tight end is. He drops back a little bit, and they just take that outside shot away from it. And it's one of those plays at least where the USC is kind of in a spot where their offense just wasn't able to necessarily pick up these shorter plays or have a sustainable of a run game. They would kind of rely on making some of these types of passes. There you can even see, at least for the most part, he kind of caught the ball, at least for the most part, but then his knee touched the ground. Yeah, and there's some good stuff at least. And I think what's interesting is that I think in college you'll be able to see the transition from here to the NFL. Kyler Murray had that same transition in his first year in the league. You remember that Carolina Panthers game where Kyler kind of is running around and starts getting tackled for a huge loss from guys, or he didn't read one of the linebackers with underneath coverage, threw the pass, the guy just makes a crazy catch and returns it. There's a speed adjustment to the game that every quarterback is going to have to make, and it's going to be really interesting to see how much of the adjustment it is for a guy like Caleb. And even if Cliff Kingsbury's offense, if we see more of these types of, bubble screens, those deep shots that are going to pop up that are, like we said, it's not even a Cliff thing; it's an air raid staple. Does that succeed the second time around with Cliff Kingsbury? Because that's going to be really interesting to see, in my opinion, if it was a Cardinals problem or if Cliff ends up being, one of those guys who can only get you so far.
Well, I mean, everybody runs screens in the NFL. That's one. But number two, they run a lot of screens over there with the Eagles even before he even got there. They did that against the Cardinals last year, which is what led to like Isaiah Simmons getting 13 tackles on that game because he was playing as the slot receiver that time, the slot corner, I mean. And they just kept throwing off to his side of the field and trying to pick off with a bunch of screens and whatnot. Uh, he was in position to be able to make those tackles there. So that's not if they hire him, they're hiring him, and they're not going to be too much familiar. Like, there's going to be a lot of familiarity with that, but the adjustments what's really going to come because you're going to know the truth when he takes that if he takes that job and it looks different. If it looks different, then you know, hey, he's adjusted, he's evolved, or something else is going on. Whereas if it looks the same as it did before, then we can obviously know, yeah, like this guy hasn't learned anything from being in the NFL for his first time. I would like to believe and hope that he did change and that he did look at it from a perspective of like, yeah, defenses are gonna adjust, and once the defense adjusts, then you got to go into a different play mode. At the very least, he has the ability to have a quarterback that can be tush pushed across the line of scrimmage. That's always great. In that situation, he's going to have with the center, unfortunately, like retiring, he's going to have a very like really good offensive line, possibly top five in this situation because Jason Kelsey retired, but still, like that's a really good offensive line to be able to work with. And of course, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith helps out a lot. So there's talent on that offensive, like on that team, and it's all going to depend on what it looks like. It already looks like the Cliff Kingsbury look before Cliff Kingsbury gets there. So what is he going to do to be able to change it if he gets that job? I heard they're also interviewing Wink Martindale as their defensive coordinator, who's kind of very Vance Joseph ish. So gives up a lot of yards, has a high blitz rate, um, comes up with some creative like looks on defense and whatnot when it comes to his blitzes. So that's going to be interesting for the Eagles to have as their staff over there, like a Vance Joseph and a Cliff Kingsbury like situation happening over there for like the second time with a different team.
Yeah, I think there's a meme at least that was made famous by another guy who does a lot of football analysis over where he talked about how there's a picture of the Oppenheimer movie where you've got like the old Albert Einstein talking to Oppenheimer, and the biggest thing that was funny about it was then they took Ken from the Barbie movie and stuck him into the background. And it said, hey, like, this is basically going to be your defensive coordinator. Your head coach is Einstein the Oppenheimer. And then when it comes to your offensive coordinator, who's like, that young stud type person, it's going to be like Ryan Gosling for the most part, which is funny because Ryan Gosling and Cliff Kingsbury do have some like good looks in common. I think that is one of the things that we've seen though, is that there's a lot of young, hot offensive coordinators who kind of become coaches. And there's a lot of times we'll see these defensive coordinators like Vance Joseph, Wink Martindale, maybe get one or two shots before they kind of move to, the next Bobby Slowick or the one guy who's there on the tree. Yeah, that's something I think I'm going to be very, very curious about for the most part, especially if Cliff Godspeed. I would say that I think that he'll be both over and underrated during his time because he did have a 500 record before the Hopkins suspension and Kyler's wrist injury, and then we kind of saw the thing fall apart. It was better than I think most people anticipated, but wasn't able to really bring that rebuild that was needed for Arizona. Now let's shift and talk a little bit here with the NFL draft with some draft talk for the most part. So we've got that pick there at 27. One of the things, at least, that we can kind of have to mention before we do is Cardinals wide receivers coach Drew Terrell. He's a guy who's, I think, a rising star for the Cardinals. He gets picked to be able to be the offensive coordinator for the Shrine Game. This is where you get smaller schools having their best players go and play in the Shrine Bowl. You get a week essentially practicing with those players. It's very much like a Senior Bowl type of offseason where you get to actually see how guys do in a week of practice and a game, get some interviews in. It's a little bit smaller on some of the circuit, but I think when you're talking about guys who could be potentially, like, let's say that Drew Petzing ends up having an excelling Cardinals offense next year, which you could lay, all right, you got Kyler back healthy, you have maybe a receiver like a Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe a team would look at him to bring that type of Kyle Shanahan offense or the Kevin Stefanski offense. He's a guy that you could maybe promote from within to be able to get one of those types of OC jobs. Maybe it'd be something where he gets the opportunity elsewhere. That's something we also see with Israel Wolford, the other quarterback coach, I believe, who's there, and a couple of others are going to be there in the pre-draft defense. We'll see if the Cardinals get to do any coaching with the Senior Bowl. I don't think that's been announced yet. The Senior Bowl gets to have underclassmen this year. I think this is good for the Cardinals because you want to get coaches up close and personal with as many of the players as possible. Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, all of those, especially the Combine, are great opportunities to do that.
Yeah, that gives us a better look at our uh, scouting wise and whatnot. Especially if he's going to be the one coordinating them, he could tell like he could be able to pick out players and be able to talk to them, get the interview process unofficially when he has to like show his system off and teach these guys how to be able to like either run routes, run the scheme, whatever cover like blocking assignments and blocking schemes they're gonna run with the offensive linemen, what tendencies they have, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, how they are as a person. Because when I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the Shrine Bowl, and they were saying that a big part about what these guys have to get out of the way is the interview process, and it's kind of like it kind of like drains them, but it's how they do in their interview with a lot of these these coaches, because a lot of these guys are like known for going to like in the third, fourth, or fifth round. You're gonna have a few that are gonna go like probably in the second or first round. So to them, it's like I wanted to get to know who am I drafting later on in the round, because we know what the talent is in the first and second round, almost to the point where they don't even have to do anything. They could not even show up to the combine. Sometimes they can to try to boost their numbers, or they can just to like bet on themselves and then get their stock higher. But a lot of these guys are going to show up to the combine in hopes of being able to impress these guys. But early on in the journey, they want to show out in practice, but they also want to show out in the interview process and make sure like the way that they speak to them, like kind of resonates with a bunch of these scouts and coaches and whatnot. Because that's what I hear a lot of times during the scouting process is like, hey, I talked to this guy. He's comes from this type of family. He has this type of work ethic. He comes from this background. He's had, his dad used to be a college quarterback or a college whatever, fill in the spot. And so that goes into the work ethic kind of part to say like, okay, this guy, I really like this guy. He looks like somebody who's going to strive to work hard. And even if he's not the most talented, he's going to be the one that's going to put in the work, and he's going to be the chip on the shoulder type of person. So that is a good advantage for the Cardinals as the offensive coordinator, as he's being the offensive coordinator for these guys, to be able to scout them and coach them and then give, first hand experience from, the Shrine Bowl. Because I guarantee you we're going to see at least one or two picks out of the Shrine Bowl for the Cardinals in this game. As we do every single year, we pick at least one or two players from the Shrine Bowl. And we all know that there's always that one guy, that one superstar that elevates himself because he came from the Shrine Bowl. He played from there. He was scouted, he was talked to, and he became that Pro Bowl type player. And, that franchise got lucky because they got to him first.
Absolutely. No, there's no question about that, at least for the most part. Like, there's a whole bunch of things you can talk more about that. One of the things I always say is, like you said and talked about character, good contrast of Cardinals players. Cardinals get John Brown in the third round. He goes in for some radio interviews, and one of the things that he says is, "Man, I love fast food, but I start working with Carson. I look and see how Fitzgerald's doing." He didn't end up being able to have a lengthy NFL career, but he did end up being able to get I think it was a grand total of about, let me see, at least here. I know he got at least his entry level contract, but he was able to at least sign for a 5-year, $5 million deal. His big payout came from the 3-year, $27 million from the Bills. But he said, yeah, I got to change my diet. Like, if I'm going to stay healthy, if I'm going to be involved, I got to change my diet here. And with Robert Condici, he gets that same radio interview basically in like his first or second year. I'm like, hey, Robert, what do you feel about with like eating? What change have you noticed? He goes, oh man, they don't care what you eat. You just got to weigh in properly. And I heard that and was thinking to myself, that's part of that character that you talk about with interviewing a guy and who just recognizes probably not going to have that same commitment to getting better as others. And I think that's something that, like you said, is important because as we've seen, it doesn't take a big school guy for all of this. John Brown came out of a tiny school. We've seen at least how there's other players. Rodney Gunter, probably the best example of the Cardinals finding a star player. And he went on to play for a while for the Jaguars. Injuries, of course, got to him. But I agree with you that watching how the Cardinals coaches attack this process is going to be very interesting. One more thing, I think, at least before we flip into a little bit with the draft stuff, but Kyle Odegaard, former Cardinals media member working with the team, he now is with Compare.bet, had an interesting interview with a current Cardinals media member in Kyle Vanden Bosch, talking about, he's like, hey, I believe in building the O-line, defensive line. Who do you think the Cardinals should draft? He said, hey, if you have the opportunity to bring in a special game-changing talent, you jump at that. Marcos, as it sits here at the end of January, we're not gone through the combine. We haven't been through free agency. Is there anything you think that if Marvin Harrison Jr. is sitting there at pick number 4 that should pull the Cardinals off of that, even for a trade back potentially? Because I think a lot of Cardinals fans are starting to be able to see, and even NFL analysts, that yeah, Marvin's a pretty special player, and if he happens to be there at 4, you may get the best player in the draft there at a potential discount because of just the way that the board happens to fall.
Well, I'm backed up by this by another person who is a person who like goes. So during the off season, he starts off with this whole like a pre-draft or like a way too early draft, like and he also, just like I did, iterated that Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. Like Marvin Harrison is a Kyler type of wide receiver because he even mentioned the only other team that would make a move for him would be like the Denver Broncos because Russell Wilson, like that's a Russell Wilson type of wide receiver as well. Well, Kyler Murray is very, same. They're not the same, but they're very like similar. So that's the reason why they picked Marvin Harrison Jr. for that location. I also iterated as well. He's way too talented for us to like pass up, but he would be like the perfect fit for the Arizona Cardinals and for Kyler Murray to be able to like have that finally that X receiver. And I know they're going to be saying things like, okay, well, I'm an offensive line coach. Building up the lines is important as well. But geez, this guy is that talented. He's been talked about to be the best player in the draft.
Yeah, this is a video from last March. So we're talking about CJ Stroud's pro day. This is going to be Giants and Bills scouts. You're talking about Brian Dable with his GM Joe Shoham, and then Billy Bean, the Bills general manager. This is their reaction, at least for the most part, to at just the pro day, which you're throwing on air. But this is with Marvin, where he's going to run a route, where they're just looking at least at how he's doing, and just the reaction that they have is, oh wow, all right. And so again, they're not even here to be watching Marvin Harrison. They're here to be watching like the other players who are there who are eligible for the draft that are in that pro day workout. But yeah, they're just watching him like, did you see that at least for the most part? That was something that at least people were buzzing about. And he's not even draft eligible that year.
Yeah, just by looking at that little quick smoothness, how he got off the line of scrimmage. They want you to be explosive off the line of scrimmage. So he gets off the line of scrimmage, drops his shoulder pads down and, slows his momentum down, but he does it smooth. And that's what like a lot of teams and a lot of like scouts and coaches, they want to look for that in a wide receiver to be able to get off their break, like get off the line of scrimmage with explosiveness, smooth transition, going straight out to the dig route. It almost seemed like he did it like in a perfect, like the angle was almost perpendicular, like kind of like a 90-degree angle. To that degree, you can get any corner to be off of you, like right there. You see what I'm saying? And then, of course, the ball gets thrown towards the outside, waits for it to fall in the basket, catches it, stops his momentum right away, and then is able to toe tap on the sideline and whatnot. That's a beautiful route. That's just like the type of things that like you see that he can do. He's a great route runner. He has speed. He's tall, but above all, he's a great route runner. That's what you want, especially for a wide receiver. This whole notion about like it's all about speed and it's all about attributes and whatnot. No, it doesn't mean anything unless you don't run routes properly. And as you can see, he's gotten a lot of coaching from his dad and how to run routes properly.
He's got that body control. It's also, he's not like, 5'11" like his dad. You're talking about, 6'4" type of freak for the
Six
most
four.
part. But it's just one of those places. I think it's very interesting. So let's wrap up at least with a little more draft talk. I know we've talked enough about at least Marvin. We'll plenty more time to talk. Let's go over, now that we have that pick settled, let's take a look at some players, some positions, or just maybe a strategy for the Arizona Cardinals with that Houston Texans 27th pick. I think, Marcos, there's plenty of time that we can say, hey, you could trade down from that pick. You could even say we got a couple of third-round picks this year. Could the Cardinals trade up? Let's focus and say if they just stay put at pick number 27, what they would do. There's obviously free agency still to go. Do you have any early thoughts or early indications what you could see potentially with this pick, and then maybe what lines up with some of these mock drafts?
Oh, you're talking about the second pick, right? The
That is
27th overall pick.
correct.
Okay.
The Houston Texans
Yeah.
pick.
Oh God, that see, I wish it was a lot easier by going like sooner. This is going to be a hard position to draft in because like we've been debating on what's the second best position that we need to draft. Like there's offensive tackle, of course, or guard. There's defensive end. There's defensive tackle, and there's corner. It's God. I hate when it gets late in this round in the round because there's so many possibilities. You have no idea who's going to be available. So
Yeah, it's hard to
I
know.
mean, it's just
I agree with you that it'd be probably easier if we could do a trade up or a trade back if you went pick by pick to see if someone fell into your range. But sometimes it's just kind of the nature of, I think that the picks between when the pick went from like 15, 16, 17 down into the mid 20s, I don't think there's as much of a difference between the early 20s and the late 20s, because if you like a guy in the early 20s, you've got enough capital, you could probably jump up and get him. It is more of also where you could probably move back for more picks. Let's go ahead and do kind of a little simulation here. So this is pretty fun here to be able to have something slightly different because there's actually a choice. You had Caleb Williams and Drake May go 1 and 2. Malik Neighbors goes at 3. I think more likely we're
Malik
thinking
Neighbors.
that it could be a quarterback. I've started to see some people, and it's been a very interesting trend. They start on the trend of, start from this side here for the viewers. You start off saying, hey, you know what? Like Malik Neighbors is pretty good, but Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best too. Hey, like the more I watch of Neighbors, the more I think, man, no, he actually maybe could be wide receiver 1. And there's a certain point when you keep watching him, we finally go back and say, all right, Neighbors is good, but yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. is definitely a tier above. Pretty easy, I think, for Cardinals fans to be able to look at here. We'll look at obviously other scenarios in case that doesn't happen, but let's take a look at how their draft plays out. So you have Cooper. I've seen him mocked sometimes with the Cardinals. He goes pretty high here overall. Roma Dunze, Brock Bowers. These are all kind of the elite talents for the most part that you're seeing are all kind of gone in the top 12 picks or so. Jared Verse, obviously, probably one of the more higher upside pass rushers that you're going to see there. A guy like Terry and Arnold falls. There's some of the players who I think we could talk about here at this pick potentially in Talais Fuega and Amarius Mims, who are both kind of right tackles in the NFL as far as their projection, pretty athletic. Along with J.C. Latham, those guys are all off the board, as is kind of a Cardinals favorite in Kool-Aid McKinstry as the second corner back in this draft. He's the third off of the board. And then you kind of start getting down into with the likes of another corner from Missouri, Brian Thomas Jr. You got the edge rusher, Braylon Trice, who I do want to point out, at least for something, that may be one of the guys who I will be very curious to watch because he's from Sandra Day O'Connor High School out here in Arizona. The Cardinals have drafted a lot of Washington defensive players, such as Buda Baker and Byron Murphy. That would be one of those interesting type of fits I think that you could look for. But right here, one pick ahead, Chris Braswell, the other edge rusher, who some people think has a higher upside even than the other pass rusher in Dallas Turner. I was almost thinking Philly Turner, but no, it's Dallas. Where do you go at least from here? Here's what you got for positions on the board at least. You've got a couple of different options. The fact that a Michael Penix Jr., I don't think he's going to go anywhere close to the first round because of some reasons. You also can see with Bo Nix off the board. I think that we can talk in the future about what quarterback may be here for the Cardinals to trade back from. But let's filter out the quarterback position and just take a look here. I don't think we need to worry about a wide receiver. Let's take a look here at the other positions and see if there's anything that you like. Is there anything that immediately stands out to you overall here, Marcos, as we I'll filter out safety for now just because I think there's enough commitment there. But what are you thinking when you're taking a look at some of the talents that are here?
I want DT, but I'm not sure. Like I said, I haven't even done my homework when it comes to like defensive tackle. Um, Defensive tackle and corner would be the next position to really address, but with all these positions being already taken, like with Kool-Aid McKinstry being gone and being like the third CB off the board and whatnot, you're going into fourth CB territory. It goes into like at that point it goes into like physical talent and speed in my position in my opinion when you're drafting a talented first round corner because we already have plenty when it comes to like 5'11 corners on our team. So we need somebody that's more lengthy. So if that person doesn't fit that build, then we need to go to defensive tackle.
Yeah, and I think at least just from some of the whispers that we've been hearing, I know Coleman's the guy who's high on Leonard Taylor, at least, who showed that he was very, very good when he lined up as a pass rusher, but was used more as a run stuffer. You've got two pretty good tackles here. Jordan Morgan out of U of A is one person I think could plug in and be a very quick right tackle solution for any team. You also are able to look at Kamari Lassiter. Obviously, Kwame Lassiter has got a big part for a lot of Cardinals fans that you can see there. Some other things that are interesting is you've got Kalen King has seen his stock take a hit. He was originally at one point like the second cornerback taken. He struggled this year against, interestingly enough, Marvin Harrison Jr. That's something I think that I'll be very curious about because he's at 20 years old, 5'11", about 190 pounds. He's probably one of those guys that you could see being able to stick because Penn State just has some of these freak athletes that seem to come out every single year. Um, the other thing I think that I like a lot here is you've got two guys that to me stand out. Actually, I should say three for an interesting place. You've got Tyler Guyton. So this is an Oklahoma type of left tackle who could probably play either on the left or the right side. I think that he's one of those guys that we just recently saw mocked to the Cardinals here in a recent mock draft. He's a big boy. He's 6'7", 327, and he's going to be very athletic as far as his testing. He's one of those guys who, if you're looking for a Joe Alt type as far as finding that big guy, that could be kind of your road grading right tackle, which traditionally you put an athletic guy at left and you get a road grader at right. The league has kind of got guys rushing the edge from both sides now, but that's one of those places you could look at. Another guy in Chop Robinson is one of those guys who is a pretty freaky athlete as well. He's one of those guys who's at 6'3", 250, kind of fits that traditional 3-4 outside linebacker run who, like a Marcus Golden, isn't too light. Like he's not going to be a Hassan Reddick 230, 240 where he won't hold up against the run. And we've obviously can talk about a lot of guys, at least like Micah Parsons in particular, who were athletic guys coming out of Penn State. He doesn't seem to have that same pedigree. The last ones, at least, to look at are the top center this year is Jackson Powers Johnson. I feels like the Cardinals aren't taking a center. He's probably last year is John Michael Schmitz. He's probably that guy this year. Anyone else stand out to you looking through this line, Marcos?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's because I'm doing this on my phone, so I'm like kind of trying to read the letters, and I'm like,
You're all good
it's a
there.
very tiny. But I think if you scroll up, I always look at the top of it. I always look at the top. So let's see what we have to work with. I'd go with Jordan Morgan, top tackle in the draft. I at this point because I'm not sure if I trust whoever is the top defensive tackle in the draft to be able to like be that good. Um, because it's kind of weird to draft like tackle later on in the first round. You can hit most of the time. It's just like the difference between the tackle and the later in the first round. There's not much of a difference between that and the second round tackle. I think wasn't Jervon Dexter like a second or third round pick, and he ended up becoming really solid. That's who I wanted the Cardinals to draft, by the way. I was a big fan of Jervon Dexter. So like at that point, it's like the differences are not too high, but like I like the build that a Morgan has.
No, I think I agree with you there. He's one of those players, at least, that I think could be a stalwart. You could keep even Paris on the left, on the right side, have him as your left tackle. When it comes to this type of draft, obviously the defense needs help, but if DJ Humphries is going to be let go by the team and you can get two stalwart tackles on rookie deals for a long period of time, it's not a bad approach. I think the only defensive lineman that I would look at, and I think he may go higher than this, would be the likes of a Leonard Taylor. I also think that Byron Murphy, the second, is eventually going to be kind of going a bit higher than where he's currently mocked. He's been mocked a lot of times in the second round. Another thing, at least, to point out with Mel Kiper Jr.'s mock draft, at least for how he's predicting the mock draft to go, he's in some interesting areas because, as far as fantasy perspective goes, he actually has not Bo Nix, but he has JJ McCarthy going in the first round of the top 16, who is not even taken yet, I believe, in any of these drafts here. That would be an interesting place where maybe JJ McCarthy goes here at 13, and then Bo Nix may be the trade back spot. But for now, let's go ahead and take our Jordan Morgan and be able to get to our next spot. So now we fall to pick 35. We'll kind of finish this out in the top 3 rounds. To me, this is pretty easy. You're going to take a defensive player. I've seen some people argue about the Cardinals doubling up at wide receiver. I think that you can probably find a guy maybe in round 3, bring in another veteran, see if you can have Monty hit on a guy along with Michael Wilson rather than just flushing the room out. Let's go ahead here and we will.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. We'll ask Marcos here. Cornerback or defensive line are the top 2. Which one are you thinking?
Okay, I'm going with defensive line. Leonard Taylor.
I would build the trenches. I know they need a corner. I think that you probably should at least go for it. Leonard Taylor, obviously the name is very big, but a little different there. So you now can see a couple of other guys that have popped off of the board, a couple more corners, some receivers, some other guys in Jonathan Brooks, Chop Robinson, and came off the board at this point. Obviously, the Cardinals are not going to be looking at the like of a J.J. McCarthy. Trotter is an interesting one because I do think that the Cardinals could probably use another prospect when it comes to the, I should say, the linebacker room for the league. This is something that I'm going to be very curious to look at because, as far as we know, the Cardinals have a lot of needs. You're probably out of the top edge rusher spots for the most part, but looking at some of the places here, you've got quite a few Clemson defensive linemen, linebackers, a couple of guards that are popping up there. And then you get into another interesting spot in round 3, which is the running backs. So you can at least take a look here. There's Trey Benson, obviously, is one of those guys who looks like a absolute stud at 6'1", 223, is about 21 years old. There's also Braylon Allen, who I believe is another 20-year-old running back, a Wisconsin RB. What are your thoughts here, at least overall, with Allen? And of course, you got another center/interior lineman at the top in Zach Frazier. I feel like I would almost think about taking that linebacker here, Marcos, just to help that defensive line, that linebacker spot, be firm against the run. And really, they struggled all this past year. I know taking a Clemson linebacker may scare some Cardinals fans, but it's not pick 8. This is pick 66 here. Do you have any thoughts or any other direction you'd go?
Well, that linebacker core does need help, so I would definitely go with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Yeah, I think he would come from a. I mean, if we're getting Marvin Harrison Jr., let's just go ahead and go for Jeremiah Trotter Jr. as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the places that's there. Now, you got some interesting spots here. You know, like there's some decent receivers still left over here, and Jalen McMillan. Use the partner to Roma Dunze. For me, looking at some of this here, it kind of is a toss-up between 2 guys for me, maybe 3 if you really like the running backs. I think I'll push the running back a little bit. You've got a James Conner was taken, I believe, in round 3 or 4. There's Raider running backs you can find. Maybe not a stud running back like a Jonathan Taylor, but I think in this spot, I'm looking at, do I fix my guard spot or do I look at that safety position here? I honestly would think that you could either look at the safety spot. I would lean away from maybe that top edge rusher, see if you can find it there. Bullard is really interesting because he's kind of like your more prototypical, I'm trying to think of it, Jalen Thompson type of guy at 5'11", about a little under 200 versus a smaller but firmer Buda Baker. You also have a decent guard in Christian Haynes. I think if you wanted to be able to say that the Cardinals need help at some of the other places that are around there, this is kind of the spot where you'd want to see a cornerback or someone like that go, but we've seen, I think, at least a couple of guys who have fallen on the offensive side. What are you thinking here, Marcos?
I think what I would do is go for possibly another. No, yeah, why not? Just like we
Yeah,
we got to try to hit at that position. Let's go for defensive tackle again.
I honestly think it's not a bad idea. You can get a DT at least that's here. You've got also that Clemson defense wasn't too bad this year with Rook Orohoro. I think that's a solid place to go. I also think I would agree in that you've got one guard spot figured out. You get another veteran guard. And of course, with safety, you probably are going to put a lot more of an emphasis on the defensive linemen. Cardinals now have another pick left at 90. And here we start to see some of those guys go off the board. Now we're getting into the later round picks. You've got at least the halfback here as corner and Jurian Jones. You're going to be looking at McKinley Jackson as another defensive lineman. You got another LSU defensive lineman that's here. Marcos, I've really kind of in this spot here, looking through what I'm seeing. There is a couple of decent interior linemen here. There's a couple of receivers. Even looking at the halfbacks, you can see that this is kind of the last little gasp of higher end halfbacks. You've got Blake Corum and Bucky Irving, at least, are two of the guys there. Ray Davis, and then Ray Allen's going a lot later than I think he probably will go at the end of the day because of his age. We've already gotten the defensive lineman out of the way. We've gotten the linebacker taken care of. Let's take a look at cornerback is where I'm leaning for this pick. What do you think?
I'm leaning towards cornerback as well. I'm going to go ahead and go with Jaron Jones.
Yeah, Jerry and Jones at least for that. So that will do it for those first 3 rounds for the most part. Obviously, the grade doesn't matter, but that is where we're at if the Cardinals stick at 27. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. There's a little copy, at least, of that mock that we'll post to our Twitter account here as well. Make sure that you're following us either on our Twitter accounts or on our YouTube channel. Just search for the Redbird Reboot. And we'll be back with future mock drafts, obviously looking at some other scenarios, Cardinals moving up, Cardinals trading back, and also see with some of the stuff we're hearing as well. Thanks, guys, so much for tuning in. Marcos, if you want to tell the people where they can find you.
As usual, you can find me at Pancake Soul and also on AZ Sports Underground.
Absolutely. Thanks again, guys, for joining us. This has been your Redbird Reboot, but now it's time for us to log off. Good night, everybody.